Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with artist Sal Taylor Kydd. Welcome, Sal.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So, Sal, how would you characterize the art and work that you do?
Well, I'm primarily a photographer, and I work creating salted paper prints. I photograph a lot of my life and my family and the people around me, and it's very closely related to a sense of place in terms of how we connect to our environment and our landscape.
How did you originally get into your art?
I've been working as a this was about 7 years ago, and I've been working as a photographer doing some portrait work and some editorial work, and I really found that I wanted to learn more about what I wanted to say as an artist, and doing work that was strictly for other people, I felt I needed time to find my voice. So that led me to starting a MFA program at Maine Media Workshops in Rockport, Maine, and that I'm in my final year now. It's a 3-year program, and that's really given me a tremendous opportunity to figure out what I'm trying to say with my work. And rather than focusing what I'm taking pictures of, it's more about what are the pictures about.
So, what are some challenges that you faced when you first started this?
I think for me, it's all about really finding a couple of things, sort of really focusing down and identifying what I was trying to say. And then sort of as a next step, how I wanted to say it. So, I started off doing my prints were in color, and they were digital prints. And I really felt I had a great workshop with Andrea Modica, actually, and she really helped me understand sort of the focus on the print and what was my print statement and what did I want that to look like. And I always felt that the work that I ended up with was 90% there with what I was trying to say, but that it really wasn't, I hadn't had that sort of melding of form and content that I really wanted to achieve.
So, what process did you use to overcome that challenge?
Well, I mean, it's just a sort of process of education, really, and trial and error and experimentation and trying different things. I did a great workshop with Brenton Hamilton, looking at alternative processes and all types, so platinum printing, gum bichromate, and salted paper. And the salted paper prints, it's a very tricky process, but the tones and the sort of ethereal sense that you get with those images really sort of everything seemed to come together for me. So that was a big part of it. And then the other big part of it was I started writing, and I started writing poetry. And this fed into a workshop that I did with Sig Harvey about book arts. This fed into a program that I was doing with Sig Harvey about, focus on book arts. And there I really found that I had, again, it was sort of one of those, wake up moments where the form and the content really started speaking to each other, and the writing that I was doing started to inform the photography, and the photography was informing the writing, and then putting that all together in a book was just immensely satisfying. And so there was sort of a bunch of things that I was focused on last year, which was all about sort of the presentation of the work. And it was a great surprise to realize how much the presentation then fed back to the content and vice versa. And it just becomes a sort of cyclical loop. Well, I think my main challenge is, it's a couple of things. One is sort of just mastering the process. I haven't been doing this for very long, and, I really, really want to sort of gain in confidence and expertise with this process because I really love it. But it is tricky. It's very mercurial. It's very sensitive to the chemistry that you're using and the atmospheric conditions where you're working. So there's a lot that goes into it. So I think technically, I just want to continue to get better. And then I would say it's just sort of managing. I'm in the final year of my program. And so just sort of managing that transition through when I finish my MFA and positioning myself so that I'm well set off to move forward and really start building my career.
Okay, so what steps are you taking to find mastery? Is it just going through the process over and over again?
It's just experience. It's trial and error, and continuing to learn, continuing to work with other people, working with my mentors, and yeah, there's just a lot of practice.
So, Sal, what are you currently working on? Do you want to bring up some of your work for us and maybe talk us through the process of how you created that work, please?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a series called Origins, and that's it's sort of a culmination of the work that I've been doing over the last 2, 3 years, and it's all about it's about how I think fundamentally it's about time and it's about change. And the way I look at that is I'm sort of looking at my family and I'm taking photographs of, my children and then the landscape that they're in. And most of these photographs are taken during our summers in Maine and when we're on vacation together. Because then I find that they're really, there's a great freedom that they have in that environment where they're sort of out exploring the world. And so I find myself drawn to, frogs and tadpoles and insects and all these things that sort of have really clear markers of change in terms of how they transform physically through their development. And I'm really interested in using, water and other elements to sort of really transform the image as well from a sort of technical standpoint. And so it's not a literal thing that you're seeing. And it all ties in together with that sort of look at change and time and how things evolve, both within and without ourselves.
Okay, Sal, so I see your work. If you just want to go into the folder where your current series is and maybe talk us through some of the concepts behind those photos.
Okay. So this is my current series, which I've been working on for the last year, and it's called Origins. And these are all salt prints that I've created in the darkroom. They're contact prints. So you take your digital file and create an actual physical negative from that file. And then you coat your paper with your salted sensitizer solution and then with your silver nitrate, and then you expose it to the sun in a contact frame. And then you develop it through your fix and so on. But the work, as I was saying, is really about, our life in Maine and the land that we feel very connected to, and our experiences in that world, in particular my children's experience in that world. And I think through this work, I'm not only looking at their childhood, but I'm really looking at my own childhood. I grew up when a time where children were a lot freer and could really, explore the world and be at one with nature. And I see that with my kids when we're in Maine. So this is what attracts me as a photographer.
Great. So what process did you use to shoot those photos?
Well, the cameras that I use, I have a couple of cameras. I have a Canon 5D and I have a Sony A7. And I like my Sony because it's light and I just take it everywhere and I'm just constantly exploring the world and responding to the world. And then my Canon sort of usually is more at home and when we're closer to home. If I can just go back as well, I can show you the work that I was doing when I started the program.
Okay.
Because I think it's interesting to see some of the parallels. This was a series of photographs I took, and they were actually taken in a house that we had purchased where the woman living in that house was a complete shut-in, and she was a heavy smoker. So there were all these sort of strange markings that you can see on the walls and a real sense of sort of the history of the place and a sense of what had come before. And I was really interested in the children that I was working with on the series in sort of putting them in this environment, and sort of they were, dressed in these sort of very classic outfits that remove them from any sense of sort of being contemporary or a sense of time. And just sort of to get that feeling of what had gone before in this house. And I think when I look at my most recent work, you know, the work is more about the outdoors and the landscape, but I think in terms of how we look at time and how we look at place and how we identify ourselves through that sense of time and place is still current.
So in the first series you showed us, it looks like you were using natural light to shoot. Is that correct? And in these photos, it looks like you're using some sort of, is it a speed light or studio lighting?
It was studio lighting. And, you know, I don't mind using that, but I think that I'm far more, let me bring up another series. I'm far more sort of drawn to natural light just because I like to move fast and I like to have that flexibility and I like to be able to respond to the world all the time. So it's nice for me to do, you know, a studio shoot now and then. But I really find sort of being in a more natural environment is what sort of brings out the strongest work.
So you mentioned before that you use writing as a tool to help you develop some of these ideas. Now, was that the case in all of these series? I guess my question is to you, how did you find the unique storytelling elements behind each of these series?
Well, I think that was something that, I mean, I've always written, but nothing that, you know, I've always journaled, I guess. And it was just during last summer that I really found that I started to sort of more explicitly write with a view to sharing that work and with a view to sharing that work with the photography. So I actually, we're going to go back to the screen so I can show you my book. So where did I start? So I started thinking more seriously about being explicit in my use of words and imagery together. So rather than just sort of journaling privately and then sort of using those ideas as fodder when I was going out and shooting, it became much more of a sort of process where I'd go out and shoot and then I sort of write about what I was shooting and you know, write about what I was dreaming and all these things, but then sort of more explicitly putting that into poetry. And then I just produced this book, if you can see this.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Just When I Thought I Had You. And it's a subset of the work that is in Origins. And, you know, some of the poems are really sort of looking at relationships and family and then this whole idea of metamorphosis and change and how families change and how we change. So I could read one of those.
Yeah, please do.
So this, I'm not sure if you can see this. So this is actually one of the first poems in the book, and it's called Sleek as an Otter. Sleek as an otter, your fishy flesh flashes quicksilver in the hot light of noontime. In the murky dark, your skin stands stark against the water before disappearing once again. You are in your element, undeniable. There is no you, no it, no other, just light, movement, splash and sinew. You slip through my fingers. Just when I thought I had you, you were gone. And so this is sort of, you know, that particular poem is very much about, you know, watching my children and that sort of mercurial nature that they have as they grow and sort of move away from you and find their own independence, and you're sort of trying to hold on to that magical time and yet sort of delighting in watching them grow and find their feet. So that's something I've been working on most recently.
So you shoot the photos first and then you go ahead and you write, sometimes a poem is developed and then you keep shooting the photos based off of the poetry. Is that how your process works?
It's really cyclical. So, you know, sometimes there'll be a word that is just sort of resonating in my head, and, you know, I'll write it down and I'll sit with it for a few days and then I'll start writing some more. And then when I'm going out and shooting, I might have that in my head. And sometimes they're completely divorced. But what I find is it's not like, I write a poem about an apple and then I go and find a picture of an apple. It's more the themes I'm exploring, that the images and the imagery and the photography is more sort of an unconscious reaction to the world and articulating the ideas that way, whereas the poetry is much more of a sort of conscious exercise. So the similarities are, it's not necessarily that one is about the other and that they're connected in that way, but it's more that the themes that I'm exploring are just universal to the work.
When you shoot using your digital camera, how do you then go about in post-processing it to get that final look? I know you said you use digital negatives. Could you please maybe walk us through that process of creating the digital negative and the steps from there?
So the process of creating a digital negative basically starts with your original file. So you have your original digital file, and you manipulate that file in Photoshop using curves and to create a negative of that image. So here, for an example, is what a digital negative might look like. And so then you print, once you've got your negative, how you want it to look in Photoshop, then you print it on Pictorico, which is like a overhead transparency film. And so then, you can size it to whatever you want. I've been doing 8x10 prints, 4x5, and then I've been doing some larger prints too. But you're sort of working from that physical negative. And so then you take this into the darkroom where you create your photographic paper, expose it to the sun, and then you get these wonderful prints. So here's an example of a print I did a little while ago. And some people who specialize in alternative processes, they really sort of are very expressive in how they do the brushstrokes. But what I've found, and this is one, I began that way, and what I found is I've been getting sort of cleaner and cleaner. And so now here you can sort of see the brushstrokes. So it's there's an element of the artist's hand there. And now I take it one step further and actually tape off the area that I'm going to cover with the silver nitrate to really get a clean line, because I like that.
So those brushstrokes were created in the physical world or in Photoshop?
No, in the physical world. Literally, you're taking a paintbrush, and you're dipping it first in a salt solution, and you coat the paper, and then you dip it in this silver nitrate, which is very dangerous. So you have to wear goggles and everything, and you coat that with the silver nitrate, and then you let it dry, and then you put it in your, in a contact frame and leave it outside in the sun, and then you develop it as you would, a print that had been made from film. So it's a wonderful merging of contemporary and older technologies. And there's a lot of people doing it. There's this wonderful woman called France Scully Osterman up at Eastman Kodak House that I'm dying to work with, because she creates the most beautiful salt prints.
So why that process? I've been reading different articles online about the history of photography, and I've read about that process. I mean, why did you choose that process to communicate your art?
Well, I ask myself that a lot, because it's really the most, persnickety process. I joke with my friends, it's one of the hardest ways to make a photograph, really. But for me, I think it, really brings in the natural elements. You have salt, you have silver, if you're doing platinum, which I also like to do, you're dealing with one of the most noble metals. And, I think it speaks to the organic nature of the work that I do. And I like creating something that's hand wrought, that feels one of a kind. I mean, I do very limited editions of my prints, but really everyone is unique. So even if I have an edition of 5, they're all going to vary slightly, because, the way the toner is behaving, the way my brush strokes work that day, it's all unique for every print. And I really like that. And I like getting away from the computer, and I like being in the darkroom, and I like sort of using my hands, and that's all very satisfying to me. So I think on a sort of personal level, with what I like to do with my time, it works. But also, I think on, from the perspective of the work that I'm creating, it speaks to the content of the work.
So it's almost like the work takes on a life of its own because of the whole organic process to it.
Yeah, I really feel it does. I mean, I'm still a huge fan of digital work. And, when I'm doing my books, for example, it's simply not practical to create, 25 copies of a book and, with them all being hand processed prints. It would just take you a year, which might be a fun project sometime, but it's not for the faint-hearted. So, I still have great love for digital work and what people are able to achieve with that. But for me, this is really appealing right now.
You're very brave. I've read about some photographers who inadvertently poisoned themselves with the chemicals used in
I know, it's really
process.
Yeah, it's kind of intimidating when you start. Like you have to be very, very careful with this stuff. But, if you're careful and meticulous, it's fine, And
you've got your own dark room, I'm assuming.
I did. I set one up in my garage, yeah.
Interesting. It's very interesting. So can you please bring up maybe one of the files that you have in Photoshop, walk us through the post-processing and then the step to create the final digital negative?
Sure. So let me get it set up for a second. Hang on. Okay, so here's an example of a file that I would create a digital negative from. This, I've already converted it to black and white, and I have these, a Photoshop action that basically I run, and it does a series of things. It flattens the, if there are any layers present, it flattens the image, and then it applies a curve. So if I hit play here, so first it's asking me for the size, and that's okay. So here is where I select my curve. So I've got to load my preset here. So here I have all these different curves for the different type of process. So you can see cyanotype, calotype, platinum palladium. So if I was choosing salt, I would select that, run the curve, and that's it. So that's my my digital negative. So now I would go and print this, and you print it using a special sort of print driver called Quad Tone Rip. And there are a number of ways to do this, but this is the way I choose to do it. And Quad Tone Rip basically just tells your printer how to print this type of file. And you actually end up with this sort of bluey green negative, which rather than a black and white negative, because the different colors of the spectrum, like blues and yellows and greens, they all have different light blocking capabilities. So I would select Quad Tone Rip and hit print. And, you know, if you research the art of digital negatives, there are a number of ways to do this, and this is just one that I learned at the main media workshops. The key element of creating the digital negative is applying the curve to the image.
Okay, got it. So does the picture start off in color?
It starts off in color. Yeah, I shoot in color because I like to capture all the information through my camera, and then I'll convert it to black and white and then convert it to the digital negative.
So it sounds like you don't really apply too much post-processing to the original color image to get it to the point where you want to create a digital negative out of it. Is that true? Okay.
Yeah, not really. It's just a matter of converting it to black and white and then, you know, making the digital negative file.
Okay, great. And then once you create the digital negative, the magic really is in the chemicals that you use in the darkroom and that whole organic process that we previously talked about.
Exactly.
Is there a particular story behind the photo of, it looked like a child holding a snake? You know, that seemed very intriguing.
Is this the one you're talking about, this image that's up here?
Yes.
Yeah, this was, my son is a big lover of catching snakes when we're in Maine. And they're just little garter snakes, and they often, give him a little nip. But there's something, even though the process with my with the salt printing ends up with these really sort of romantic looking prints, I'm really interested in sort of capturing the elements of our domestic lives that are a little darker than that, because I find that the tension between the content of the photograph and the form of the photograph is a really interesting one. So here, for example, and there's another photograph actually where the snake is actually biting him, and it's got tiny teeth, so it's not, it doesn't hurt him at all. But, there's something really powerful, I think, when you're looking at something that has that sense of danger, or not even menace, but discomfort. I think particularly when you're looking at children, that is perhaps a little bit more of an honest look at the way they experience their lives. I think often we think about childhood as something, really joyous and free and innocent, and it is all of those things, of course. But also I feel what's interesting to me about that with my own children's lives and watching them is really seeing the struggle as they grow and as they change. And so for me, these images, a lot of them are really looking at that. So for example, there's the picture of my daughter doing backbend. And, the backbend is really sort of mirroring, you see the tree in the background and the shape of her legs. And there's a real sort of sense of her sort of power, I think, as a young girl, growing and changing. And I really love to explore that in the work. And here again, it's, we were having a great day at the pond, and it's not necessarily that you first see in this image, but you see this sort of this, I call this image Lola rising, because she's just emerging from the water and ready to take that gasp of breath. That's just really intriguing to me and really beautiful.
Did you time that photo? I mean, it's a beautiful photo. I mean, did you guys have to? Is that photo candid or was that staged?
No, that's a candid photograph. I mean, oftentimes with my daughter especially, she's very creative, so she's a great collaborator in a lot of the work. One of the photographs that I have in my collection is one that she totally was helping me, in terms of, putting flowers in her hair and facing this way or facing that way. So she loves to collaborate together on the work. But this one was quite candid. She just, I was taking photographs and she was under the water, and then she came up, and I was just fortunate enough to be there. I mean, I know that this pond, which is by our family farm, where my husband's family are from, on Deer Isle in Maine, as soon as I know that we're going down there, I know it's a very magical place for me, and I always take my camera.
Is there a reason why you use shallow depth of field for a lot of the photos, or is that just for the art?
Yeah, I love using shallow depth of field. I love the way you can sort of manipulate the viewer's eye to really focus on exactly what you want them to focus on, and that everything else drops away. It's become something I use a lot more in my recent work, because I love to have an air of mystery in the images. I love to leave something unclear, and something which brings the viewer into exploring the image a little bit more. I think this image is an interesting image. Again, I think it's the use of very shallow depth of field and the narrow focus on the frog in her hands. So the frog looks a little trapped, it looks a little desperate to get out, but then there's a softness and a gentleness with how she's holding it. And I find that interplay of conflicting feelings really interesting to explore in my work.
Definitely a natural element in this series, the frogs and the snake and the nature. Now, would this be a lot different if you were, say, in the city, and you weren't surrounded by all that nature?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, most of the year I live in Los Angeles, and that's a big challenge for me. So what I find is that, when I go back east, that's when I do my shooting and really taking a lot of photographs. And when I come back home, that's when I do my printing and make my books and sort of put together and do the editing work.
So with that said, how do you find time to work on your art? What's the best way that you do that? Because it sounds like you shoot a lot when you're on the East Coast. You print when you're in Los Angeles. How does that all work out for you?
How do I find time for my work? Now, there's the endless question. I mean, I'm a mom. I have two small kids. But I think you have to, and a friend of mine, when I first started really, really focusing on my work, and she said, you have to treat it like any other job. You have to commit the hours, and that's what I've done. And that's the challenge, and that's the joy of it in a way, is you have to put in the time, and you have to treat it seriously, and you have to take it seriously and take yourself seriously. It's great for me in that I work from home, and so I'm here for my kids, and my kids are are so inspiring to me. I mean, they're the content to my work, but it's definitely a juggle, and you just sort of take it day by day, really.
So how do you balance that with promoting your work? I know, artists, they have to also spend a lot of time promoting their work. So how's that worked out for you?
A lot more hours. I mean, I have a show coming up in Santa Monica on March 5th at the Gallery 169. And, this has really been an eye-opener in terms of understanding what it takes to promote a show. I mean, for me, this is my first show, and so I'm giving myself the benefit of using it as a learning experience more than anything. But it's my background. I used to work for Yahoo for a long time as a producer, and so I understand social media. I've worked with PR departments, so I kind of understand how that side of things works, which I think makes it a little bit easier for me. But I'm very conscious of it not sort of sucking up all the time, and just making sure that I have time to do the work. So for example, right now, I've been, sending out mailers and working on my book, and then I'm in the dark room, and then I'm at the framers, and there's a lot of plate spinning that goes on, and projects that are at different stages of development, So some of the book work might feed into a later project that is beyond Origins, and some of the the writing again is sort of so you're sort of working on promoting the new show whilst still generating work for what comes next. But I think that's, for me, I enjoy that. I like keeping the work fresh and keeping working. I couldn't imagine sort of not doing anything for a while. But sometimes you do have fallow times where you're just like, oh my God, you're just coming off something, a big project or something, and you're like, oh, I can't imagine what's next. I don't feel inspired by anything. And I certainly have that. And I think it was Sally Mann that said, you just take the picture. When you have those moments where you're feeling not very creative, you just go out and take a picture, and then you take another one, and then you come back and you see what you have, and then you go out again. I always used to be under the impression that creativity was this bolt from the blue, and it was consistent, and you were just a creative person. And I've realized that with my own creativity, it's really it's a roller coaster. Sometimes I'm just firing on all cylinders, and it's go, go, go. And then there are these fallow times, but I feel that the fallow times are necessary to sort of feed you, to then get you going again on the next journey. So it's all grist for the mill, as they say. For me, the way of getting through those fallow periods is just to keep working. Even if it's not feeling fluid or it's feeling a little disjointed, it's just to keep taking pictures, keep responding, even when you don't feel like it. I mean, sometimes I feel this real visceral sort of physical resistance. Like, I don't want to take my camera today. I don't want to. but I'll just put it in my bag and then see. And then sometimes I'm just like, you know what, I'm taking a break this week. And another factor I think is the writing is very helpful. So whether it's just, you know, just always keeping that access to your subconscious. So, you know, I find that this last week, you know, I'm working on a paper for my MFA, I'm making books, I'm preparing for the show, and then I'm printing, and you know, it's such an incredibly rich creative time that you know, my main problem is I can't sleep at night. You know, I go to bed and my mind's still whirring, and you know, it's really hard to sort of slow everything down and sort of get some rest.
You know, it's no simple feat for an artist to get their own show. What did you do in the beginning to promote your work to get a show?
So interestingly enough, I think one of the big shifts for me is I tell people I'm a photographer, I'm a fine art photographer. I think there were two things. One was embarking on the MFA program. Again, it was an investment in myself as an artist that I think really helped me take myself seriously. And I think when you take yourself seriously, other people take you seriously. And then the second thing was I started hanging my work in my home. And I'd never done that before. And my husband was always saying, where's your stuff? You know, why don't you put it up? And it was all on my computer and shared online and social media. And I really hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about that, you know, the print statement and what I wanted the print to look like and how I wanted it framed and how I wanted it to be installed. And that's really a huge part of being an artist. So actually sort of going through that and printing work and putting it up and seeing what it looked like and seeing what worked was another big step. And not one that I would have realized really. And then, you know, because people that come to the house and they see your work and they see what you do, and it gets a conversation going, and you know, it's really word of mouth, I think, that then spreads the word.
Great. And you're working with a PR firm currently, right?
I am, yes.
How's that working out?
It's working out great. It's my first time working with Shoebox and Christine, and she's great. Yeah, it's been good so far. We haven't got a very long window with this particular show, so it's a good time for us both to sort of test each other out. But she's great.
So, who would you say are your influences?
I think I have a number of influences, both on, I mean, I think everybody does, or every artist does. I mean, I think certainly from the photography side of things, I think Sally Mann was a big early influence for me. I really respected her work ethic and how she works with her family and with her children. And I remember watching the documentary What Remains about her and her practice, and it was a real lesson to me in the sort of the diligence and the discipline of being an artist and of just producing the work and working hard. And I think, you know, when we think about art, that's often overlooked, is how important that is. And I think, you know, Sig Harvey has been a tremendous mentor to me and has been invaluable in helping me sort of find my voice and identify what's working and what's not working. And then work I really love the work of Andrea Modica. I think she does beautiful prints, and she prints on vellum. I don't know how she does it, but they're just always so beautiful. I've been looking a lot recently at the work of Raymond Meeks, and he's a photographer and he does a lot of photo books, and has just a wonderful gift of, I mean, his themes are very similar to mine in terms of, you know, family and that sense of place. And how that informs who we are, which really resonates with me and my work. But also, he's just got a wonderful way of telling a story through his work and through his books, a wonderful narrative sense that I would always hope to emulate.
Right. And with that said, how did you go about in finding your unique voice?
It's the MFA program's been a tremendous help in that, and I think it's just keeping on doing the work. And then I think the big thing for me has been writing about the work. You know, someone once said to me, it's about noticing what you notice. You know, and literally if you sat down and you looked at what you photographed and and started writing about that, and then looking at the people that you like, and looking at the people and looking for those similarities and gaining an understanding of your context in the larger scheme of things. You know, who are your peers? Who are your contemporaries? Where do you fit? You know, what are the themes you're exploring? What are you coming back to again and again and again? And I think that for me has been really helpful in terms of identifying my work and just writing about it from a really sort of literal perspective. Gaining that understanding has been really, really important. And then just experimenting, you know, from a sort of aesthetic point of view, just experimenting, you know, what kind of work do I like? You know, and listening to those voices, listening to what your voices are telling you about, you know, if you really respond to black and white photography, well, maybe you should be trying to, you know, you should be doing black and white photography. And yeah, not being afraid of anything, just sort of exploring and experimenting and not being afraid to fail and not being afraid to sort of try again has all been really important for me.
And do you have a piece of advice that you wish was given to you when you first started, or a piece of advice that you wish to impart to aspiring artists?
I would just say work hard, and I don't think that's necessarily a piece of advice that I wish someone had said to me, but I think just, you know, work hard and keep experimenting. And also a great piece of advice that I did get and that I've been doing for the last year, which is really helpful, is documenting your work. So, you know, for me to be able to look back on photographs of different book ideas, for example, that I've, you know, tried, screwed up, threw away, but to, you know, so if I photograph as I go, you know, I remember what I did and I'll refer back to it and look back to it, and that has been really helpful. And taking notes, you know, just sort of writing about what I do, you know, from a technical perspective, I think is really helpful. You know, how long did you expose that for? Did it work? Did it not work? But I think documenting the work is a really great piece of advice.
So what's next for you, Sal?
Well, my focus after this show is going to be finishing my MFA. That's my, you know, I've got my thesis to write and I've got my final show to produce, and that is really, it's really like a laser is where I'm going to be.
Great. And where can people find you?
They can find me on Facebook. If you search for Sal Taylor Kydd, I have a Facebook page about my work. And also you can find me on Instagram under Sal TK Photo. And then my website, which is saltaylorkydd.com. So I'm all over the web.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sal, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.
So that's our show for today. If you have any questions, please send an email to me, ry@makephotoart.com. For more articles and videos, please visit our site at makephotoart.com.